Hi everyone, my name is Megan Cruz, and this is my treatment presentation on collaborative conversational therapy. The treatment session I observed was on Master Clinician. This session was a child language treatment session. In this session, collaborative conversational therapy was being used. Collaborative conversation is when an SLP teaches a student to use high-level talking and thinking skills in academic conversations. The behaviors that were targeted during this session was the use of more descriptive words and expanding vocabulary. This session was a loosely structured session because conversational speeches were used to train target behaviors. The session was a very conversational between the clinician and the client. Materials that were used during this session were Zoom, a book, and a whiteboard. In this session, I witnessed the clinician use a mental set in order to set expectations for the session. The clinician also teaches the client how to use dialogue to gain perspective on a character's inner feelings by lifting the client's vocabulary, using verbal rehearsal with visual cues, asking open-ended questions, among other clinician strategies. In collaborative conversational therapy, students are taught how to engage in academic conversations with new conversational skills introduced as they progress. Throughout the session, reinforcements were verbal and on a variable ratio schedule. During the treatment session, key skills that were used by the clinician were to ask open-ended questions, use nonverbal behaviors to invite the client into the conversation, provide multiple structured opportunities for conversation, use directives to bring students into the conversation, and referring to specific passages in text to help the client stay on task. Regarding the effectiveness of this session, there was only one activity which was completed throughout this session time, which was going through a story and discussing it between the client and the clinician. I felt like spending all that time on one activity was not super effective since the treatment session was about an hour long. Whenever the clinician used a whiteboard to visually cue lifted words to expand the client's vocabulary, the client responded really well to that. So I think the use of the whiteboard increased the effectiveness of the session tremendously. Things that I would change would be to do more than one activity throughout the session. I think that the client would benefit if there was more than one activity because towards the end of the session, she was not as enthusiastic as she was at the beginning of the session. Also, there were some technical difficulties with Zoom during the session, so I would possibly try to resolve those with the mother before the client session began. Lastly, I would make use of the whiteboard more often during the session because the client really responded positively, and I was able to see an immediate click with the client whenever there was a visual cue with the whiteboard. So next, I'm going to go over my peer-reviewed journal article that was over collaborative conversational therapy, but this was through the professional perspective. So I selected this article because it went into the professional's perspective on delivering conversational therapy in clinical practice. The relationship between the peer review article and the treatment session was based on the effectiveness of conversational therapy that was done during the treatment session that I observed. The article investigated conversational therapy through the lens of the speech therapist. I thought that conversational therapy was an extremely interesting topic, and I wanted to learn more of the professional perspectives on this type of therapy. The peer review article investigated how speech therapists define conversational therapy, delivered conversational therapy in practice, and identified any challenges that were faced during conversational therapy. A total of 50 speech therapists completed a survey, and 6 participants attended the focus group. Conversational therapy was found to be widely used by the participants. Although there was a different variation to the approaches that were used, which caused a handful of major challenges to be raised. The speech therapist reported delivering conversational therapy with a range of client groups. The conversational goals were reflected on an approach based on strategy use and total communication, as well as conversational analysis. The participants in the study related to the client in the treatment session because they are providing the same type of treatment the client receives during the treatment session that I observed. The participants are investigating how they, as speech therapists, would define, deliver, and identify challenges of conversational therapy during speech. An online survey and focus group explored how speech therapists working to deliver conversational therapy to support people with a range of communication disorder. The data was analyzed using descriptive statistics and thematic content analysis. The speech therapist wanted to use conversational therapy and desired a clear outcome to measure and demonstrate its effectiveness. Conversational goals predominantly reflected an approach based on strategy use and total communication and conversational analysis, like I said before. The 3 overarching themes around conversational therapy emerged from the focus group. These were what conversational therapy actually is, showing that it works, and the complexities of delivering it. The speech therapist acknowledged the benefits of conversation therapy, but felt the lack of tools and skills needed to deliver it. Limitations of this study is a small sample size, and there was only one focus group held. During the focus group, it was not made explicit whether participants were to discuss conversational therapy in relation to people with only aphasia or also other acquired language disorders. There is a need for a larger sample incorporating a broader geographical spread because this study was done in only the southeast of England. A larger geographical spread would yield more accurate results. While the data is limited by the small number of participants, the study was able to provide a first view of how conversational therapy is articulated in practice. However, they were not assessing the evidence-based and highlighting the ongoing difficulties of translating research into clinical practice. Lastly, issues worth further exploring include whether the experience of a speech therapist influences the use of conversational therapy, and how the clinical setting may have an impact on the approach that is selected. So in conclusion, conversational therapy is acknowledged by the speech therapist to be beneficial and is delivered to the clients with a range of non-progressive and progressive conditions. The speech therapist in this study primarily used informal assessments and often carried out a combination of conversational and impairment therapy. Treatment duration varied and was influenced by a range of factors. The challenge remains as to how to enable the translation of evidence-based in conversational therapy into daily clinical practice. Here is my citation for my peer review article. If you guys have any questions, please let me know, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you so much.